Falter, welcome back. This is video number 4, part 4 of book 2 of the Convoluted Universe by Dolores Cannon. Video number 1 we did last week, and today we've done video number 2, video number 3, and this is part 4. So we were beginning chapter 16 called Searching for the Wise One. And it begins with a session that Dolores Cannon did in 2002 with Nancy. Now remember, most of these people are anonymous. Most of these sessions occurred over a 4-decade period of time until she had what she considered sufficient material to put into a book, and what her, I don't know quite the right word to use. The beings that spoke to her through her subjects would allow it to be made public when they felt the time was right. So Nancy is put into a trance. She finds herself barefoot on gravel at the end of a cliff and is a young man. Someone is trying to scare him into going over the edge of the cliff. There are others there that are short and made of light white hair, and he is tall and dark and has black hair, so he knows he's not part of the group. These people that are trying to convince him to go over the cliff are real small and have like they all look alike. They don't have distinguishing features like individuals. And he knows that they're trying to teach him a lesson. So he also knows that these guys popped up out of nowhere and that they can fade back into nature. So in this story, he was passing through a village and these beings are afraid of him. He's on a journey to the east to see a holy man in a mountain who knows magic, like, you know, going to the master at the top of the mountain sort of situation. This is a very secret place that he stumbled onto, and that's why these people are hostile. So they don't understand what his speech, his language. They robbed him of his supplies. They made him kind of paralyzed, freezed in place. They took his shoes. Now they're pushing him to jump. But all of this took place with the power of their minds. And he is strong-willed because he's been working a lot on his mind, and he resists and tells them stop in his head. And suddenly they completely change their attitude, give him back all of his stuff, and they seem regretful that they've treated him this way. It's like that he was finally able to get through to them, and they realized that he was not a threat. They let him go, and he realizes that they don't belong in this time. They've come from the future. So this is a weird kind of session for Nancy to go back to find herself in the body of a young man, and there's this confusion about is this a past life of mine? What's going on? And who are these creatures? Well, apparently they're from the future. And Nancy's very confused and seems distressed. And so Cannon says, let's move to a day when you're still this man, but you're a little older and not in this village being bothered. And she takes her to Nancy describes to Cannon, takes her to a Himalayan marketplace, and she's in Kathmandu in Nepal. And as a young man, this man feels himself being drawn to the top of this mountain. He can just feel like this urge to go to the top of the mountain. And he does, and he finds the wise man living in a cave, and he does have the shape of a man, but really he's an energy being. And this old man says that he's the embodiment of many holy ones, and he's a composite of souls, and he exists as a bright light, and he's appearing as a man for the sake of Nancy as a young man. Never did give a name, so it's hard. So he doesn't have many visitors because he doesn't want people to know what it is he actually is. He draws the visitors to him. He can exist in more than one place at a time. And he says to the young man, Nancy, that the fact that you were able to make this hard journey and that you felt compelled to make it proves your intent. And I could have appeared anywhere to you. That wouldn't have been a problem to me. But you needed to prove your dedication to learning what you needed to learn by making this difficult journey. And Nancy says, I had to go to him. I knew I had to learn. And I had started on this trip as a mason's apprentice. It was just out of the blue. So I've come to learn to share the teachings of the one. And the old man had drawn him to him because he was the right young person to be handed down this information. These are the truths of the Christ and the Buddha and many others. Jesus was not the only one who had his act together, and there were many, and there were women too, and they are the manifestation of what many would call Christ energy. So this young man learned while he slept, and he was there a very long time. And he eventually returned to the bottom of the mountain and was greeted in the village at the bottom of the mountain with big celebration because they kind of knew this was a special thing. And they provided him with clothes and supplies, and he knew he had to go south and teach. So now he was old, and she had brought him to the point where he was old and had many grandchildren. And he died, and he talks about this in this session. He describes the fact that it was just an easy transition. He knew it was going to happen. Light beings came to them, and he joined them. He met with them, but he didn't need to be guided because he kind of knew what was up. And he said, I'm just the same person as I was a minute ago, but without the tired body. So he learned universal wisdom, and he learned about strength and love. The little people with the pale hair who all looked alike, they were a test to see if he could handle power and confrontation without getting hostile, and to meet it with the energy of love. They were from another dimension, not another time. So he had been confused about that, and I think, if I remember correctly, at the session, when it's first discussed, Nancy is even confused about that. So everything is learned in all lives and kept in your subconscious. It's not lost, and it can be brought forward and used right now if it's an appropriate thing. So that's that session. Then Cannon does a session in 2004 with a woman named Gail, who in trance sees that she's a young male and kind of semi-primitive, living high in a mountain in caves with other people, kind of hut cave things, and their job was to gather food. And he saw weird drawings on the rocks, and his people didn't do it. He knew that they weren't responsible, so he knew this was from previous times. So he took these rocks and he kept them, and he didn't tell anybody else. People were superstitious and suspicious about him keeping these, maybe magical or omens, or they just didn't think that it was natural, therefore it wasn't safe. So he decided to climb to the top of the mountain to see if he could find more. And on the way he found a beautiful blue crystal. And he found near the top of the mountain, and then he found a cave, and there was a guy inside the cave carving, and as he was carving a rock, as he was carving the rock, sparks were flying out of it, and the guy was all sparkly and shiny and had big eyes and a sloped pointy head and was very, very unusually glowing bright, and communicated with the young man Gail, as a telepath, and the young man fell asleep, and when he awoke, the guy was gone. And he sees that there, all of a sudden, when he went to sleep, there were not a lot of carvings. When he woke up, there were all sorts of carvings all over the place that were symbols, and he'd never seen them when he entered at first. So he was shocked when he went outside the cave because there was snow and ice outside, which hadn't been in there when he fell asleep. So he is trying to describe another thing that he sees when he steps out of the cave, but he doesn't know quite how to describe it. He says it's kind of like a lava flow meeting the snow on the ground, and they're shaking. And he doesn't have the words to describe, but after a whole lot of trouble, because he's traveling on ice and snow that he absolutely wasn't prepared for, he falls and he hurts himself, but he finds his way down. It's very slippery, and nothing at the bottom of the hill looked the same back at his cave. But he found his cave settlement that wasn't the same people. And the huts were more dilapidated and in need of repair, much older looking. No one knew him. All his relatives were dead. And then he realizes that he is old and gray and that people don't know him. And he tells his entire experience to the people, shows them the rocks, and they don't believe him. They think he's some crazy guy who had a head injury. One young woman believes him, and eventually, as the session progresses, he describes that he's dying, and she's at his side when he's dying. And the message that he has to give through Gail to Dolores Cannon is the quest for knowledge is an important thing, and it's inside of us. And that the being that he saw was from another solar system. And I just feel like, this is not in the book, but I have to say this. This reminded me so much of the Rip Van Winkle story. I truly believe these stories and myths have a kernel, an origin of truth. The Rip Van Winkle story was identical. The only thing that was missing was the thunder and the bowling, which is an interesting kind of metaphorical way to describe the noise of interdimensional travel, which is described elsewhere. Kind of interesting. So he also, through Gail, said that new knowledge will come telepathically, and during the time in the cave when he was unconscious, he was unconscious in a different sort of way than a Republican sort of way, a right-wing Republican sort of way. He was learning things while he was unconscious. His body was sort of in suspended animation, and he was fed on energy. What he had seen was a volcano. And he said the earth is a living energy, and the living energy was coming forth in the form of a volcano. Symbols were placed in his head by ETs for later use in which is a common story we hear all the time. And also the purpose of the crop circles, as I mentioned before, as another person in a different session mentioned before, that the crop circles are actually symbolic. They're a language, they hold messages, and they're a language that's understood by the subconscious. Now we're on section 5, called Other Planets. Chapter 17, Life on Other Planets. In 2003, a woman named Margaret was a hypnosis student, and at a class that Cannon was holding, she volunteered to be hypnotized for the class to learn how to do it. So she finds herself in trance as a man in a barren desert, and there's a hole in the ground with a ladder that goes down, and it goes into lots of tunnels and rooms, and there are people living underground and living very simply. He didn't really know how they got supplies, but they did use fire, and there was a lot of light down below. He didn't understand how that happened. They have never lived on the surface, he learns. He's some sort of a guard. He watches for machines, so that there are machines that come by, small ones that fly fast, close to the ground, which sounds a lot like drones, and this is before they did those, and big man-shaped ones on two legs with arms, like they walk, kind of. They're all metal, and they scan for holes to take people. They're looking for people to steal. So Cannon takes them to a future day. They've been found, and when the machines find people, they suck them out of these holes. People run much deeper to try to get away. So then they move a little bit into the future, and his son is leaving to serve as, well, you know, like in the military. And he feels very proud. And also, he eventually is honored for his service, and he doesn't have to work anymore, because I guess he's retired, if I'm reading this right. Yeah, he's kind of honored and retired, and is allowed time for reflection, which they think is really important. And he wrote a lot of books about his experiences. This is in the future. And then he experiences dying, and they do age, and their bodies are cremated underground. So the whole message behind this session was the importance of introspection. It's really important. Now that's two people in a row who say you have to look for knowledge inward, and that introspection is really important. We don't do that. I don't do it nearly enough, I know, and I just don't think people do in general. We're either running around or we're entertaining ourselves, and we're not taking time to just, which I think was the huge message of the pandemic. It was a slap in the face, but I digress. So this was coming on Orion. That's where they were. And his community was an outpost, and he was bringing supplies. So these two-legged machines used the energy of people that they stole for fuel. Ugh. And at their central base, it's how they powered their base. So they needed, I wasn't clear if they killed them or, you know, but that's what they were doing. So most of Cannon's subjects learn that they're here now for a specific reason, service. But they get too caught up in daily life. And when they do these sessions with her, it kind of jump-starts them. It reminds them. They're always told they're here for a purpose, to make a difference. We all are, right now especially. And that we all get caught up and lose sight of our true nature and our true purposes. In a different session in 2004, this woman that went under trance saw beings on a different planet that were humanoid. They were covered in kind of a tight material, hard to distinguish between their skin and their material. They all looked the same, only their faces were uncovered with that fabric, but they could breathe through. They had a panel. They even, you know, only their face was uncovered, but they had it from here, but they could breathe through it. They didn't eat, they didn't sleep. The subject traveled all over the galaxy, taking soil samples was the person's job, looking for habitable planets, and died when this breathing device in a bad atmosphere broke. Weird, huh? Chapter 18, The Planet with the Purple Sun. In 2003, Cannon had a subject called Molly, who described a purple and green place, the only light that was in this place. She realized when she finally figured out where she was in a cave with lights at the top, and the lights were reflections of crystals. And she realized that she was a 15-year-old male who was kind of furry on the torso. His life was already adult. He had a family, and he had family responsibilities, and only he knows about this cave, that he was out working, trying to gather food or something for his family, and discovered this cave. And when he was a child, he used to escape to rest there, and now as an adult, he goes there. He lives in a group of about 15 people. They grow things, but this cave is his little secret. He goes on quests for dragons, is what he tells people, that he's going on a quest for a dragon. But what he does is he goes and hangs out in this cave full of crystals. And this group trades with larger groups one time a year to get things they can't make for themselves, like tools and stuff. And he's very content with his life. It's a temperate climate. They have a lavender purple sun. Cannon is surprised. She thought this was a primitive Earth and that he was a primitive human, but no, this is someplace entirely different. The sky is all shades of purple. They don't have night. They don't have fire. They prepare their food with hot rocks from the ground, and they have hot water and steam from the ground in the mountains. They hunt for four-legged animals for food and for fur, but they don't use them as beasts of burden, and they do use telekinesis to move things and to drive their hunt. What they look like: 2 legs, 2 arms, and their hands have no little finger, just 3 fingers and a thumb. Their skin is black. They have black hair, black beards. They have 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth, so they're very humanoid. They live in a structure. They live within a structure, which is a large dome that is a shared space that has private areas, which are domes within the dome. And it's made of some kind of polymer. They don't build it. They go to a library and they see things. This is really, I thought this was so interesting. They go to this library. They see things on projections. They choose what they want, and by thinking of it and where you want it, it will appear there. This is how they actually manifest things. Their children fine-tune this skill. They're born with it, and then they fine-tune it. They have no cities. They live in smaller groups. They're more comfortable with that, and then there's less of a stress on the land. They get together, and the way that they all get together once a year or whatever in a large group is they think about it. They could walk. They can if they want to, and they do have daily chores and everything, but they usually travel long distances by thought. Then she takes her to a future day, and there's a quake, and the mountain is exploding. It's hard to breathe, and they are asking, have we displeased the gods? They have many gods. They have to appease the gods, who they regard as little children who get mad when they don't get their own way. They do have priests and priestesses, and to appease the gods, they give the priests money and honey. And the priests will say, you didn't sacrifice enough to help us. You didn't give us enough. So, you know. Cannon discovers that they can't fly by thought because, well, that's what I wrote. I can't fly by thought because she's gone to a different lifetime in this life and makes gold jewelry. Okay, so without Cannon realizing it, the person who was doing telepathic stuff is now in a different lifetime. So she says, okay, so you make gold jewelry and this is interesting and you're not as telepathic, but let's go to that other life that you were in before. So some of these sessions jump around, and it's really hard to make a cohesive story out of them because they jump around, so bear with me. So in the session, she's taken back to the primitive guy in the fur with the purple sun, and she goes back to the day of his death, and he has chosen it. They can die in an accident or of an illness, or they can just decide to leave their body and choose death at this particular time and place, and their body dissolves into the earth just immediately. And the people celebrate, well, the earth, it's not the planet Earth, the earth, the soil. The people celebrate that you're free because your spirit is freed, and they have learned that they can leave space for others to make their own discoveries and perceptions. So they decide, well, I've had enough. I've had a good run. I'm going to go now so somebody else can come. The purple sun is not in our solar system, but it's a central sun. They choose shorter lives to keep the planet underpopulated, and everything they have is manifested with their mind. Now, Molly is the subject, and she could still do this. canon is told, today in this life as Molly, if she could get past her fear of doing it. So now the subject jumps to life with a volcano to point out the stupidity of turning life's power over to outside influences like the religious belief system. So the subject is jumping around. The person who's speaking through Molly is jumping around to try to get some points across. As a very small child, Molly could make things move with her mind, and that didn't go down too well. It scared her mother, and she shut her in closets for days for making the silverware float in the air and for turning on lights. God, I thought my kids were difficult when they were toddlers. So Molly learned to suppress this, but she could do it now if she got over the fear of the past and how she was punished. Now we're on section 3, time portals. Now this is a bit of a mind blower. This is really hard to wrap your head around. And I think, I'm glad I'm going over it again, because I think the more you go over it, the more sense it starts to make. So Cannon discovered there was sort of a connecting chain between all these subjects. Somebody in the past would have brought a subject up, and then it gets left. And then a few years later, somebody else brings the same subject up with a little more detail. And eventually, over 4 decades, she's got this narrative thread that makes sense because she's had time to digest it. And that's the important thing, is to return to these ideas and try to process them. So chapter 19, the guardian of the portal. More frequently for her, the subjects tend to be going to parallel lives, and they're usually pretty dull lives. And here she's talking about 2002 in Florida, Betty, who's a nurse. Betty, under trance, sees a huge crystal like an ice mountain. It's not cold, it's not ice, but it looks like ice. And a Native American boy in front of her, dressed in traditional, like a loincloth type thing. So she knows that she's a huge energy form, has no perimeters, is sort of an energy glob that's shifting and changing, but has consciousness. She says, I can integrate with anything. I can go in and become the crystal, or I can separate and be aware of myself. So she's not... Okay, so now they're in Ohio, and it's not a crystal mountain that we're talking about. It's a spaceship, a vehicle. And so this woman is jumping into these strange lives. She sees an opening and realizes she was seeing the illusion of a mountain, and that the mountain was actually cloaking what was really a spaceship. And all the other mountains around her were brown and green and normal. And she was confused. Did I really see what I thought I see? What am I seeing? She's realizing, I guess the comprehension is coming, that there's more than what meets the eye is happening to her at this point, and doing it under hypnotic trance. So she begins to realize that what she's looking at is not solid. It's like a doorway between worlds. She says, I feel like I'm a part of it, and the keeper of a gateway. I keep out those who are not supposed to enter. So she realizes, okay, I am this energy form. I'm here looking at what some people will see as a mountain, but really there's a portal, and there's on the other side of it a spaceship, and nobody's supposed to see it, and it's my job to guard it. So there's weird shifts in the atmosphere, and sometimes when the atmosphere shifts, people who are really not supposed to see things actually do see things. So her job is to keep people out who don't belong. The guardian of a portal between worlds. So you have to have a certain energy. This is why. You have to have a certain energy to enter. Now, if you stumbled on this portal without realizing it, and weren't prevented from going through it by this being, your body would dissolve because it can't keep up with the energy, and your spirit would just be confused, I can imagine. So this is an opening between two worlds of different vibrations, dimensions. It's a stargate between dimensions. We're living in a multi-dimensional universe, according to all these books. It's really hard to wrap your head around. So we're living in this multi-dimensional universe, which, by the way, modern physics actually confirms. And that's the best they can do for us right now. They really can't explain much more about it. And it does have to do with the vibratory energy, the movement of molecules. And because of our limited senses, we're limited by what our body can input. And also because of the vibratory speed, the frequency, we're enmeshed in all these universes, but we don't even know it. We don't see them. That's weird to think about. So this is an opening between dimensions, and she realizes that as this energy glob, she can use her mind to keep the wrong people from seeing it, nudging them away. So you go out for a walk, and God knows how many dimensions you might encounter along the way that you're protected from by higher beings, because your energy's not fast enough. So there's a description of this portal thing, and it's so hard. There's a tube that's a transport system to another galaxy, and there's one end open here and one end open here, and you can go through and transport yourself through space and time. And I'll do a little physics thing. So this is the galaxy, and here you are, and here's where you want to be. So rather than walking all that way or flying all that way in a spaceship, it meets together in this tube. That's the best that I can understand it. I don't know how accurate I am, but that's the best that I can understand it. So now I've lost my place. Okay, so it's a readjustment. It's an area that gets you back to your proper energy when you're going through that vibe from place to place. Inside, it looks like a beautiful crystal room, and it's for physical beings of lesser density. They look human, and they can't leave the portal, but they can see through it like glass. So it's like an observation tube. Some people can travel, some beings can travel through it because they have the ability to adjust their energy. Those who can't adjust can look through and just observe out of curiosity. Like that there's a woman's bathroom at the top of the Sears Tower in Chicago that hangs out over the street, and it's, God knows how tall it is, I can't remember, but it's entirely glass. It's an observation. It's like a closet on the side of the building, only it's entirely made of glass, and you can go stand in it and you can look down, and it is nauseating. But this you can stand in, all crystal around you, and look out and see another world without having to worry about your low vibration or whatever. So they're observers, beings come from other densities, other dimensions to stare at us. This other subject is a woman who saw a wormhole appear and saw beings going back and forth through a large, elongated tube with circular ridges. I'm kind of imagining like duct tubes in the inside, and they were actually entering the earth through this, so it was actually a means of coming into the earth. And in the other one, it was like an observation, and you can see anywhere you want to see, not just what's in front of your eyeballs through the crystal. So the first subject, the guardian, leaves part of her energy to guard and become the person using the portal to describe. So you're getting the benefit of two beings for the price of one. There's the one that's guarding, and then able to go in and describe to this trance subject what it is seeing. On either end of the portal, it's cloaked because only some are able to work within the energy. The information is transcribed about what they see. This is important. And they transcribe it using color and light to send it into the tapestry like a weaving of light, and it's a living record, and we've heard about that in the book before. The portal's used by beings from many planets to gather information, to learn about the Earth, to help the Earth, to beam information to the Earth as an inspiration to help us. So they say that the Earth is struggling right now. We, the people on Earth, are struggling right now. And we're moving out of duality. And as this happens, the duality intensifies, kind of last gasping, trying to grab on to not being ended. So these beings are beaming information as mass consciousness to unite and create reality. So we are being affected by these energies, whether we know it or not. And that's why we see this growing division, fascism, polarity. Oh, I wrote this down. I said, this is why global craziness is going on. The duality is intensifying. It does explain it. So there's reason for hope. And I have said that over and over, especially when people send comments. I keep telling them, just hang on, because this book explains that as bad as it looks, it's a good sign that things are heating up. They're clinging on for dear life to the last gasps of their low vibration negative stuff. So every time you think, oh, this is so terrible, how could it be so terrible, current events, realize that there's something very positive behind that. So this is being felt all over the globe, and it will help to unite us. It's like a higher council that assists the earth and assists us with our growth. People on the earth are in transition, our energy is shifting, our vibration is increasing. This is all messages that Canon is getting through this woman, this blob of energy thing. Inspiration is sent to us, but we can't be forced to accept it. It will resonate for some, but it won't resonate for everybody, and we have to be compassionate about that, understand that not everyone is going to want good things for everybody. There are people who are going to maintain their selfishness. So we must experience life as all forms of life on earth and work our way up. So we all started out as rocks and then went to be human. You begin with the God source and you return to the God source, and the term God, the term source, it's just the inadequacy of our language. It's the source. So our job is to return to the source with knowledge, and our cells in our body are gathering information all the time, and our subconscious has information, and it's all about the communication of knowledge. That's the importance of what we're doing. Our brain, our nervous system, our DNA, it's all a processing system, and all knowledge is stored in our subconscious, and we are energy, and at death we continue, and our energy decides on its next form and the path that it wants to go to learn more. We go from a microcosm to a macrocosm. Our information is transmitted and stored, and the source accumulates data. There's an interest in the earth because many types of energies are here, and the earth is beautiful. The merger of the spirit with the biology is all about the integration of all of this. It's a system. Humans take it for granted, but many are starting to wake up to the drama of the whole thing. Many beings in the universe are watching this whole thing unfold. It's a little bit of a show. The first time, this is the first time that an entire planet will shift en masse. It's the density here on Earth that keeps the energies here to be resolved. I mean, the Earth is dense and it traps beings here because of karma. ET visits include the shift of the energy to a change in the vibration, and they have to change to visit here, They have to manifest to the physical. They have to lower their energy. It's very difficult. And they come because we need to know that others exist. So they're doing us a service, and we shouldn't be afraid. We're unaware because we're so narrow. We're limited by what we can comprehend, by what we can sense. Our understanding and our physical ability to even take information in is really limited by comparison. And there are some dark ones who want to control, but they know they're not going to be successful at that. This guard entity exists and is there as a guard all the time, and at the same time is the woman Betty, who's the subject of the trance, at the same time. And the spirit can split. It's just about focusing. It's not like a separation. It's a multiple focuses at one time. And our perception is too limited to fully understand this. But we can unknowingly live more than one life at a time. Okay, that's where it starts to really get. Okay, chapter 20, the aborigine. In 2002, a woman named Lily goes into trance and finds herself on the grassy veldt in Australia by a big mound of rock, which is Uluru, of course, Ayers Rock. It's the world's largest monolith and a wonder of the world, and it happens to be on the same global grid that the pyramids occupy. It's a holy place that changes color from blue to red. It's hollow below the ground with an energy source. Dreamtime, I'm going to say this wrong, I apologize, I'm trying. Tujukurpa is Dreamtime. It's a record of activities of ancestral beings from all travelers from the beginning to the end. Life on Earth is Dreamtime. We're living a dream, basically, is what that means. The area around the rock is inhabited by ancestral beings, highly evolved beings, and activities are recorded at many sites around the world, and sometimes people have noticed and been able to record them, and a lot of it is not understood. And there are paintings around the rock that's what the purpose of them. We don't know that, but these paintings are telling the story of the original inhabitants of the rock, and they get repainted over time so that they are fresh and stay in our memory. And this has been going on for thousands of years. So this hypnotic subject says that the tribal people lived nearby, and in her trance, she was a male, had brown skin, black hair, not very much facial hair, wore pelt skins on his torso and a loincloth, was 20 to 30 years old, which was not young in their time, and was a warrior. He wore beads on his neck that indicated bravery and protection, and his hair was beaded and had tusks and metal that were honors and represented important things. A chief, he was a chief, but not a chief, something akin to a chief, but not a chief. Had decorations on his arm and chest and neck. Skin incisions were also used as decoration to prove what a warrior, how much prowess he had. This was a tradition. It started at puberty. And every time they killed an animal or killed an enemy, they would get a mark. They didn't like to kill people. It was against their religion, but to protect yourself, it was okay. White men came, but the natives see these glowing men like bulbs behind them, and they describe these glowing beings that look like bulbs as long stalks and glowing light. So they realized that there's something about the white men. The white men came out of spaceships from far away in the sky, and you know, these primitive people, primitive by our standards people, are not quite knowing what to make of it. The glowing ones are like pulsating brains. They're white at the top and blue at the bottom. They're like a computer. They're naked. They have no genitals. They want to take the children, and they come to test the soil. But they do bring the children back, and the children come back with knowledge, with tools, spears, with rocks carved at the end that they can use, and discs of soft stone that they can use. And the children are told not to talk much about what they have experienced when they go into these ships. Well, they're spaceships. They just, the native people don't know how to describe them. But they're told not to talk about what happens because it will scare the women. So the kids tell this subject that they travel to a distant place far from the moon, that there are purple beings there that are kind of amphibian looking, that it's damp and hot with green vegetation. These beings look a little bit like upright walking salamanders, and that they glow, but not as much as the tall glowing beings that they saw. They say, the little one of them says, "Papa, you would not understand." So Aborigine life was much simpler than, you know, city life. These beings travel in time, and the kids are given mercury-like liquid to add to the crops, and then the crops grow. They are studied in return. So there's an exchange happening. They take the children and they study them physiologically, and they study their brains, and in return they give the people methods of agriculture and tools and weapons, and they barter. They're bartering all this. They would kill, originally they would kill people out of fear, these beings out of fear, because, you know, they were stealing their children. But they would be taken onto the ship and revived. They would get new soul energy from coming down from the top of their heads into their bodies, and they'd come back alive. And apparently the year that they first showed up was 1500 our time. And so this is all going on in Australia around the 1500s. Kind of sound, I don't know, this is not in the book, but it kind of reminds me of, I don't know if it was the Aztecs, who believed that people from the sky came in ships, and that's who they thought Cortez was. When he showed up, he thought that that was those people returning. I wonder if there's a connection. I bet there is. So this whole story is drawn on the rocks, and many people completely disappeared. They went off with these ships, and they didn't want to come back. And it happens here too, today. This happened to the Anasazi in Chaco Canyon in New Mexico in the 14th century. They just decided to bail. They took off. They disappeared. So these beings could be scary for people to look at, and his father had warned him, this is still the person speaking through sessions, not to go near the spaceships. But the younger kid said, well, they want to help us. So Cannon brings this subject to a future day. So what she's gotten so far is this kind of confusing story about an Aboriginal young man who, she describes him, who has been living in this community that's experienced abductions by beings from spaceships, temporary abductions, that there's an exchange of kind of scientific observation for tools to make life simpler. And there's a lot of fear and misunderstanding on the part of people living on the earth. Kind of hard to overcome because these creatures are really strange. So Cannon takes him to this subject to a future day, and they find themselves in an unknown place in front of a tall stone. It kind of looks like a flower structure, like a leaf standing on its end, and it's obsidian. And she recognizes that She's in another world and is kind of uncomfortable. And it's very dark because it's inside the earth. And the subject recognizes that she's gone through a portal near cliffs. They look like a shadow on the rock, but with the right vibe, you can go through it and you're gone. And she saw tunnels under the earth, and doesn't recognize as it's a woman being hypnotized and is experiencing herself as a man. So I keep using the wrong pronouns, but this new person, this person in trance, doesn't know which passage he came in from, but is a little confused and realizes, oh, I've gone through a tunnel and I'm underground. And talks through the subject and lets Canon know, I get knowledge from this stone that we're looking at, and they put a head on the stone originally. And Canon has heard this weird story about underground flower-like stones with heads, and she's heard this twice before. And they get science and scholarly information, for example, how to time travel without using any kind of spaceship from this stone. It feels like it's secret. And the subject says, I want to go get my people who left, and then I can die in peace. So he wants to go to wherever these spaceships took the people and bring them back. And then we'll feel like he can die and has completed his mission. He feels a desire to connect and to gather them. So he says, I merge with the stone, I become light, an eternal sun, only energy, and I don't want to go back into the body because it's too limited. I feel I've been here before. I am a big glowing light. It's glorious, it's limitless. These white beings that have been described before are space travelers. They're good, and they just like to exchange things. The glowing ones are pure light beings, and they're trying to help and trying to educate, and that's originally in the earlier session why they were kidnapping the children. They look like amphibians just because of the climate on their planet, but inside of them they are gold rays. Older people carve discs in the sky and on the rock, and the white beings only, because the amphibian beings were just kept secret. It was too weird and scary. So the message is, there's a great test of wills battling on the earth, much strife and disease and combat. Emissaries are here to bring peace, harmony, and wholeness. They dedicate their love. They try to activate beings to get in touch with the light. Forces will come into balance, and they will be triumphant with the scale of justice. Told you there'd be good news. It's called the Great Experiment because there is really no definitive outcome, just probabilities. And it's so important to remember that because of one of the laws of the universe, free will. Potential destruction exists, but potential equilibrium exists, and it's kind of up to us. There are those on either side who must do what they need to do. I'm going to stop here. This is the start of a new chapter. So I'm going to end video number 4 right here, and we will continue next week with this book. I think something tells me, usually I would do 6 or 7 videos and not even worry about it, but I feel like this is important stuff to digest, and it is presented in sort of a little bit of a disconnected way, because that's how these sessions are. They are separated from each other over time and place, and within the sessions there's a lot of meandering. Sometimes people jump from life to life, or different entities speak through them, and it takes Canon, half a page or something to figure out what's going on. And the stories all relate, but they're given in fragments. And I I think it's important to kind of digest it and try to understand it. I think there's an important message here. And it's worth our while to devote. Introspection, gathering of knowledge. So I'm going to leave it as it is, and we'll return to chapter 21 next week. And I'm sure there'll be plenty to talk about for the rest of the week. So thank you very much for watching. I think the feedback I've gotten, people are really enjoying these books. So good, that makes me happy. And until we talk again, thank you, and Slán go fóill, and Sláinte.